Let's now back up a bit and go over more ActionScript theory and language fundamentals so you can get a better understanding of the scripts that we've used so far, and those we'll be looking at later in the tutorial. Let's start by revisiting one of the most important scripting elements, variables. Programming is mostly about manipulating information in the computer's memory, so there needs to be a way to store pieces of information in your code. Variables are the basic storage unit in ActionScript. Variables, as we've seen, can be created, changed, and updated, and there's where the name comes from. I've already introduced you to variables, and we've used them in almost every script we've looked at so far in this tutorial, but let's delve a bit deeper into their use in ActionScript 3.0. Now, up to this point, I've had you think of variables as storage containers that hold values of any data type, such as strings, numbers, integers, and so on. However, you also need to think of variables as identifiers. When writing statements to manipulate values, you write the variable's name in place of the value. Anytime the computer sees the variable name in your program, it looks in its memory and then uses the value that it finds there. Here are examples of variables from the script we looked at previously to get our volume slider working. Notice the structure of these variables is the var designator, and then the name of the variable, the type of data that it holds, in this case Boolean, in this case down here it's going to be a number, and then the value of the variable, false for the case of Boolean, 0 for the case of number here. Now let's say, for example, that you have two variables named value1 and value2, each containing a number. To add those two numbers, you could just write the statement value1 plus value2. When Flash is actually carrying out these steps, the computer will look to see the values in each variable and then add them together, providing a result in this case of 3. Now, as I mentioned, you want to think of a variable as an identifier. However, this data type is also important. When you create a variable in ActionScript, you specify the specific type of data that it will hold, as we did here in our script for the volume slider. Do that with the colon and then identify the type of data. From this point on, your program's instructions can store only that type of data in the variable specified, and then you can manipulate the value using the particular characteristics associated with its data type. In ActionScript, to create a variable, which is known as declaring the variable, you use the var statement, as we've seen in multiple cases throughout the course. Now, to summarize all these examples here, you can see that in ActionScript 3.0, a variable consists of three different parts. The variable name, that's in black here, rectangle, dragging, start dragging, and there's more examples here. Up here is pause position. Then after that is the type of data that can be stored in the variable, in this case a number. And then finally the actual value stored in the computer's memory. In this case 0 in the case of my Boolean variable, false or true. Getting deeper into each of these three parts of the variable name must be a valid identifier. It cannot be any special words that Flash reserves for its own use, such as true, false, null, Boolean, number, any of these blue terms, play, pause. For example, you'll notice here this function is called play underscore instead of play, because play is a reserved word, so I can't use that for either a function or for a variable name. Also, variable names, as with functions, must be unique. You cannot use ActionScript elements as the variable name. Common student mistake is that they'll use a variable name twice in two different scopes. That'll throw an error at runtime. Now, the variable scope determines the lifetime of the variable. It also determines the visibility or which variables are available to the other parts of the program. ActionScript has three types of variable scopes. Local variables, which are labeled var, are declared with a function or inside a loop. These will be visible only inside the function where it's declared. A local variable is declared by this keyword var. Local variables expire once we complete the execution of the function. Here's a very good example of the proper use of a local variable. Here's a script that we'll be looking at shortly. I have a variable I that's only going to be used, it's an integer, it's only going to be used for this loop statement right here. And then once this statement is done, denoted by that closing curly brace, that variable will be removed. In other words, the computer will no longer store this information in memory. And I've also got timeline variables. These are variables that are available to the script on that timeline. In order to declare a timeline variable, we just need to initialize the variable in a frame. And the last type of variable is a global variable. These variables have global scope. They're available to the entire document. You declare a global variable using the _global syntax, like so. _global dot site name equals geekmanuals.com. So that variable right there, site name, let's go ahead and close up that space there, much better. That site name variable will be available throughout this entire Flash document, all the scripts that are enclosed or included in this document. Now with Adobe Flash, there's another way to declare a variable. Whenever you place a movie clip symbol, button symbol, or text field on the stage, you've learned that you always must give it an instance name. Behind the scenes, Flash creates a variable with the same name as this instance name. This variable can then be used in your code to refer to that stage item. So for example, if you have a movie clip symbol on the stage and you give it the name volume _ MC, whenever you use the variable volume _ MC in your ActionScript code, you will in fact be manipulating that movie clip. Now in addition to variables, you also have elements called constants, which are similar to variables but a bit different. So let me now move on to the next movie and review constants and provide some script examples of how, when, and why you would use them.